Welcome or welcome back to Lift You Up Inspiring Health Stories. I'm your host, Tamika Bickham. I'm the founder and chief storyteller of TB Media Group, but for the purpose of this podcast, I am your health and happiness matchmaker. Now, before I tell you more about today's episode, you know what I'm going to ask you to do. Connect with me on LinkedIn, hit subscribe on YouTube, and turn on notifications so that we can stay connected. Now today, I am back for just a solo episode of just me. Why? Because it's episode 50, and we're taking a look back at some of my favorite stories. Our physical, mental, and emotional health is not just a want. It is a need for happy lives and prosperous businesses. Lift You Up is the podcast where we share inspiring health stories from business owners who are fulfilling their purpose to live their healthiest lives and helping you do the same. From former TV reporter to marketing entrepreneur and content creator, I care about sharing stories that matter and stories that connect us. I'm your host, Tamika Bickham, your health and wellness matchmaker. Well, welcome to the show, episode 50. Seriously, I cannot believe that we made it here. I mean, I can, because we were in the middle of a pandemic when we launched this show. And what else did we have to do but create a ton of content and share it online and connect with all of you? It's been a wild ride. At times I was like, I don't know how I'm going to keep this thing up, because this is a lot of work. But I truly get excited each and every week for all of the guests that I get to meet, interview, learn from, get inspired by, share their stories. For those of you who might just be tuning in and haven't heard a prior episode, I come from the news world. My background is in journalism, and what really fueled me to pursue that as my passion is telling the stories of others. I truly believe that stories connect us all, and we all have a story. And I think I have a special knack for connecting with people, pulling out those interesting elements of who they are, and sharing those stories with others. And I made a career out of it. And now I'm doing it here on my own podcast, which is fun because it allows me to get a little bit deeper than, a minute, 30-second or 2-minute package in local TV news, and spend a little more time getting to know each of the guests. So what I figured I would do on episode 50, because I was back and forth, like I was going to share things that I've learned, which I know I did in a previous episode after 6 months of podcasting. Now we're just rearing the corner of 1 year of podcasting. But I'll link to that episode about 6 things I've learned about in 6 months of podcasting, and how it benefited my business. I'll link to that below in the show notes. So I was back and forth on kind of including some of that information in this episode and health-related things that I've learned and how I've grown through interviewing so many knowledgeable guests in the health, wellness, and happiness field. But instead, I decided to kind of look back at some of my favorite episodes and really interesting guests. So I'm going to share some of their stories really briefly. And that way, if you're just kind of catching up or you haven't heard any of the episodes, this can give you a little preview into some of the crazy stories, cool stories, fun stories, inspiring stories. And that way you know where to start, and you can kind of go check those out from there. And also, hey, why these stories really resonated with me as well. Like, something that may resonate with me might not resonate with you, which is totally okay. But that's why I do this, because honestly, I truly learn from everyone. So episode 3, this was early on when I was first starting the podcast. I shot with Renzo Barreto. He is really, really great. He is a financial planner in the financial services industry, but it's so much more than that. Like, he's created a division of mental health within his department at his job. And the quote that stood out to me that he said in this episode is, "Your net worth does not equal self-worth." And so many people link the two. And that still sticks with me. And I still have people who listen to that episode and say, wow, like, I really felt that. Like, we used that quote on my social media because it truly means so much. Like, finances are such a huge part of people's lives, but it shouldn't be our self-worth. At least that's what I believe. I loved his message there. And he really goes deeper in taking it back several years ago in his life and losing one of his best friends to suicide, and knowing the challenges of mental health that his best friend went through, as well as in his own life. And I think that's something, even though that episode aired at the very beginning of this pandemic and we were all kind of processing what this time meant for us in our lives, I think we didn't really fully comprehend what mental health or how it would be impacted through this last year. And we really took a look at that in that episode, and it was helpful. And I just really love the initiative that he's taken to combine that within the frame of what he does in the financial services industry. Like, there has to be that component, because there can either be shame or all different types of feelings that people feel when it comes to their finances. And ultimately, if you're not talking about it, you're not improving what might be a perceived problem, or you're not getting better, you're not learning, you're not growing if you're just kind of ignoring it and putting it in a box. So I love that episode. Renzo is so well-spoken and just great at being open and sharing. So please check out episode 3 with Renzo Barreto. Moving on from there, this episode I'm going to talk about is, wow, Susie Levan. I'm pretty sure she is the first near-death experience guest I've had on this show. Not the only, which is crazy, but she's the first. And she tells a wild story about being kidnapped at gunpoint, a home invasion. Her husband was working for a bank at the time, and these criminals were looking for the money and kidnapped them. And she was in the trunk of a car with her 7-year-old daughter at the time. Couldn't breathe. I won't give away the whole story because it's really unbelievable. I can't even imagine, even hearing her tell this story, what that experience could have even remotely been like. But hearing from her and how that was life-changing, right? Like, how could it not be? But going through that and surviving being in the trunk of the car for hours, especially with your daughter who's terrified, and how she got her through that experience, is quite the story. The years of therapy that came after, and then what she does now to empower other women. Something that I have learned that I want to mention, everyone's business is impacted by health in some way, right? Like, all of these things that happen in our lives, like if there's some mental health aspect, there's something that happens to us physically, like that impacts how we move through life, how we work, how we build a business. And it can really shift how our path. And that's really ultimately what happened to Susie Levan. And I've truly been inspired by so many guests. She is especially one of them, who take the challenges and the struggles that happen to our life and turn them into something positive that can help others. Because at the end of the day, you're not alone in whatever it is you're going through, even if it feels that way. So I loved that story and just her positivity despite such a wild ride. Moving on to the next episode that truly remains like one of my favorites, with Dr. Nzinga Harrison. She is so smart. She also hosts a podcast called In Recovery. She specializes in psychiatry and the substance abuse field. And her podcast is really all centered around, like, do we all have addictions? And that's what I called this episode, because, and I don't want to butcher this, but my understanding of it, and Nzinga, if you're watching this, feel free to correct me, but the conceptual idea of addiction is knowing that there's negative consequences to whatever that thing is that we are doing, but still doing it nonetheless, still doing it knowing there is that negative consequence. So on her podcast, she talks about everything from eating to gambling to overworking to addiction to technology and our phones. And it goes on from there. It's not just about the substance itself, like not just about addiction in terms of drug abuse or alcohol abuse. And I think I took so much away from that, because what I learned from her is that helps like normalize this in a sense. And not that that's making addiction or drug abuse okay, but oftentimes there are people who are like these outliers in society, and we all need compassion and love and care and understanding. And when you can connect with somebody, like how I was talking about earlier on in the episode through our stories, if you can connect with somebody because you relate to them, like my problem might be like, I'll link to the episode that I did with her on her show about control. The drug is control. We all have our things. And that is really why that is one of my favorite episodes, because for me, it was an eye-opener, and it helped me realize that, hey, just because, like, it doesn't matter what this person over here, their drug of choice is. Like, I may have a drug of choice of my own too. And it doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other. It's different. Our experiences are different, but we can relate. So just, take a step back and take a step outside of yourself, and don't necessarily cast that person aside. Have more understanding and more care and more compassion. And it truly shows in the work that she does and her passion through, the services they offer through Eleanor Healthcare. So make sure you check out that episode. It's really eye-opening and really fun. I'm also going to link below to the episode I did with her on her podcast in recovery, which I will link to below as well. The next one I really, really enjoyed with John Lewis, who is, it's funny, when I asked him, I said, what do you call yourself? What do you do? He's like the CEO and founder of Badass Vegan. You can find him on Instagram, but he's an advocate, a filmmaker, an author, a speaker, all of the things. So I don't know if there's one thing that I could call him, but he is vegan. He is plant-based. He is a healthy eating advocate. For those of you, if you went all the way back to episode 1, which is my story, I wouldn't say I subscribed to the labels, but about 2+ years ago, I went meat-free and got rid of all of the animal products in my house, made that change. So he's been one of the people I followed for a long time. And at the time that we were shooting his podcast episode, he's worked on a film called They're Trying to Kill Us, which is really about the intersection of food justice, social justice. He's got a lot of powerful voices in that movie. So we really dove into that, as well as his path and his advocacy work and around just education and helping people understand healthier eating. He went through his own journey with that after his mom got ill. Usually, like, there's something that happens in your own personal life that makes you want to do it, whether it's health reasons or whatever that may be. But he shares that story, as well as putting together this film, and shares specifically, apart from the film, that I won't give away because I want you to watch it in this episode. And I think it was the first time he actually talked about this part in the film. But basically, when they took swabs near these pig farms where they were having to find a place for the waste of all these pigs from the pig farms that they were slaughtering. So what happens to it? And what happens when they test the residents' homes in the radius, 5-mile radius surrounding these pig farms? Well, use your imagination or go check out the episode with John Lewis, which will be linked below as well, to hear what happens in that film and his reaction to it. So it's definitely eye-opening. It's a great episode. If you've even been thinking just a little bit about decreasing the amount of animal products you take in, or making that switch to going plant-based, he offers some great tips and some educational nuggets that might help turn the key for you. So that is certainly one of my favorites, because I always love connecting with others who have made that change in their life and that I can learn from and continue to grow myself. And moving right along through one of my top 5. And I don't want to say these are all the top 5 episodes, because there's so many good ones. It's really hard to pick. Like, I take something away from each and every one. But this one was very recent, just a couple weeks ago, with a friend and colleague of mine from the University of Miami, Cynthia Fleischman. She is a beautiful artist. Her artwork is called body paintography, and she basically paints people into environments, right? Like, kind of getting rid of that separation we have between our environment, whether it's into a tree or a chair or a staircase, and takes the photographs of it and creates beautiful artwork. And she paints people completely nude. And her whole thing is, this is nothing sexual. This is about expression, and it's also about celebrating your body, being proud of who you are, right? And being part of our environment. And I feel like that point was driven home so much more in her episode, because in 2015, I believe, so about 6 years ago now, she lost her leg. She is an amputee, and she lost her leg in a crash on I-95 here in South Florida. And she tells that story in detail in this episode. And I just can't imagine. I mean, she's, hey, it's changed my life. But she says, this is what I've always done, is celebrating the body. And now, how beautiful is this? I have a new shape that I get to explore and try and celebrate. And this girl's out here salsa dancing, water skiing, ready to get back on the motorcycle and all the things. Like, I just love her positivity surrounding it, her being so uplifting and inspiring, motivating other people, and continuing to take this circumstance that was so negative and happened in her life and use it to influence her work, and then inspire other people to just love themselves that much more. Like, I relate to that so much, because I feel like I can be very hard on myself and judgmental of myself, and never feeling good enough, or wanting to lose more weight, or wanting to achieve this next body goal, and just always finding something wrong. And to just sit down and have a conversation with somebody who doesn't see what's wrong, right, but sees what's right and what's beautiful. That is just such an honor for me. So I so appreciated that episode more than I can explain. I hope that there are some things in there in those top 5, or some of the top 5 that I mentioned, that maybe you relate to and you want to learn more about. So go check out those episodes. I'm definitely linking them all below, and their contact information as well. And, feel free. You can always peruse all of the episodes on all of the podcast apps, ntbmediagroup.com/podcast. And, it's been a fun ride. I'm not going to take too much time this episode, because I want you to check out the other episodes. But 50, I mean, I can't believe we made it. I guess that's about too shy of 1 year when we started this, 52 weeks. So proud we got here. Couldn't have done it without the awesome team. I feel like there were days where we were like, how do we keep going? But it's fun to take a look back and see, hey, all of the people that I've met, that I've learned from, that I've connected with, that I wouldn't have otherwise without a podcast. So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, there are just definitely so many benefits to it. You can help build your business. You can meet new people. You can just get inspired, get new ideas, build connections and relationships during a time that, hey, it's much harder to build connections and relationships. So it's really been a lot of fun for me to do that. And this has been a positive outlet during a time that, has felt so different, for lack of a better word. So anyways, if you've been on this journey watching every episode, wow, send me a note. Be like, Tamika, I have watched all 50 episodes. I am going to send you something nice. So I appreciate you being on this journey with me. And I look forward to seeing you back next week for 51. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, because if you're just stumbling upon this podcast to lift you up, inspiring health stories, hey, maybe you don't know where to start. And thanks for celebrating 50 episodes with us. But now you can go back and check out some of those really great stories, connect with some of those guests, as well as connect with me, because I'd love to stay connected to you. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, and I'd love to know what you'd like to hear more of. So make sure to find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm all the places, but especially on YouTube, where you can watch each and every episode of this podcast. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay connected with me. And I will see you back next week for another episode. But until then, stay happy, stay healthy.